There we go. Beautiful. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ara Brown, and I have the privilege of serving as a search consultant with Strategenius. And I am hoping that you are familiar with Strategenius. This is the team that you see right in front of you on the screen. Yes, I know I'm not on the screen right now because I am chatting with you, but this is the wonderful team that we have that is here to support you really in all aspects of the school, not just when it comes to search, but also when it comes to professional development. This wonderful staff is positioned all over the United States. Myself, I'm here in Southern California, but we have individuals who are based in the Bay, individuals that are based in the South, as well as in my home state, my original home state of New Jersey. So some of the ways that we partner with schools is clearly trying to get great individuals in front of you when it comes to candidates. We support our candidates by helping them with mentorship, thinking about their professional development, but we're also here to support you and your professional development. And that's part of the reason why we created this series called Inspired. And the idea behind that is to get thought leaders together, to put us around the proverbial table and to be able to discuss issues that are pertinent to us so that we can make sure that we are successful both in our positions and in our schools. I do want to give a quick shout out to all of our member schools who are on the call today. Thank you so much for your partnership and for showing up today. It is greatly appreciated. And without further ado, what I would love to do at this time is to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Carrie Grimes. So Dr. Grimes is a professor, at Peabody College at Vanderbilt University, and also serves as a director of the school's Independent School Leadership Master's Program. If you're looking for a great opportunity to further your career or to gain more insight on independent schools, I strongly encourage you to check out this program. It is designed for busy executives like yourself, so I do hope that you will take some time to review the materials. She completed her EDD in Leadership and Learning in Organizations at Vanderbilt, and her research focuses on promoting leadership retention and leadership pipelines within independent schools, something that we could all benefit from. Carrie's career has been centered in education leadership, including roles in administration, teaching, counseling, and institutional advancement in schools and programs in New York, California, and in Maryland. Throughout her career, she has focused on community building and imaginative problem solving across a wide range of stakeholder groups, including toddlers through young adults, parents, adult learners, donors, and alumni. Carrie has a BA in English from the University of Pennsylvania, my alma mater, go Quakers, and an MA in Applied Psychology from New York University. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Carrie.
Thank you so much, Ara. And thank you everyone for welcoming me into your community today. It's really a treat to be here. So I'm super excited to dig into this content with you today. And just kind of want to start off by saying this is the beginning of a conversation. I look forward to staying connected with you. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn or reach out to me via email after today. And hopefully this can be the beginning of a conversation about some really interesting ideas. So I would love the opportunity to stay connected. So this is kind of our roadmap. I like to let people know what they have in store. And so going to start with a little temperature read on the room and some gratitude. Then I want to get a sense of your school's story. So we're going to start with a little data collection in the chat waterfall. Then we're going to dig into the science. What do we know about the neuroscience of storytelling? I think this is incredibly fascinating, and there's lots of interesting research out there. So I'm going to do my best to distill it for you and to highlight key points. If time allows, we're going to have a little roundtable discussion and sort of engage with what I like to call some thought sparkers in response to the content. And then finally, I always want to provide practitioners with key tools and takeaways. So I will be giving you some recommendations for interventions you can animate in your advancement practice at your school to inspire change and improvement. And so that will be our roadmap. So again, I want to thank Ara for having me here today and the Strategenius community. Um, I met Orpheus I was doing the math, I think 27 years ago, at my first independent school job in California when he was starting Strategenius. So we go way back, and I am super excited to still be connected to Orpheus and this incredible team at Strategenius. So thanks again for having me, Ara. Um, Awesome. Okay, so I like to read the room. I'd love to see where people are today. I like to understand what people are bringing into the environment, um, given that we will be spending time together. So in the chat waterfall, if you could just share your current role at your school, that will help me be sensitive towards the professions that are represented, as well as a word to describe how you're feeling today. This is something called the mood meter, and I use it often at the beginning of instruction with my professional learners because, as we all know, schools are crazy places. Life is crazy and busy, and we're often bringing something into the learning community. So if folks can just take a minute and share in the chat waterfall, what are you bringing into our space today, and what is your current role at your school? Go for it. Awesome. Ooh, love it. Oh, everyone's in kind of the green zone today. Hopeful. Green and lots of green and yellow. Awesome. Tired. Okay, Jeff. Thanks for keeping it real. Alumni coordinator. Okay, some alumni folks in the house. Feeling good. Curious. Excellent. Curious is a great place to be to learn. Energized. Awesome. Ahead of school. Okay, so I'm seeing some broad representation across the advancement operation. Busy, yeah. Gifts officers, that's a thing. Excellent. Great. Well, as Ara mentioned, I bring 20 years of independent school practice into the work that I do at Peabody. Before I worked in academia, I spent time in independent schools, just like you. And so I understand the sort of live-a-day affordances and constraints of those environments. I've worked in really small, under-resourced schools and kind of fancy, well-resourced schools. And so I've got sort of a sense of the breadth and diversity of the kinds of places in which people are working. And I try to ground the things that we're learning about and talking about in the realities of those experiences. I'm also super curious about people, which is why I think some of my research and some of my writing is centered around emotion and cognitive science and motivation. And I also just really care about how we can continue to be the best versions of ourselves as leaders and contribute to empowering our schools to be the best versions of their selves as flourishing organizations. And I really believe that, you know, storytelling is a part of that enterprise. And so I'm excited to dig into that today. So I'd like you, in 3 words, to share the micro story of your school in the chat waterfall. If you had to describe your school in 3 words, what would that story be? Thank you, Amanda. Mm, excellent. So different cool schools in different kinds of places, evolving, ambitious, tradition, exploration. These look like exciting places to work. Change makers, joyful. Excellent. Wow. Wonderful stories. Thanks for sharing. So, when we think about stories, the power of stories, as human beings, we are hardwired for story. Um, we wonder, like, what is it so about a story that holds such a powerful grip on the human imagination? And we know from science that stories are indeed very powerful. We know that stories can actually influence our perceptions, change our behavior, um, persuade, uh, flow into our decision-making processes. And so, as human beings, this essential affinity for narrative, we are born with it. And it is stitched into the fabric of our psychology as people. Fun facts: exposure to stories has been proven to enhance our capacity for empathy. And stories that are designed to persuade are much more impactful in actually changing values and beliefs than nonfiction that is designed to persuade. And so we're actually dealing with something that's really powerful here. And when we think about independent schools as these communities, we have a real opportunity to tell stories that will, as Forbes says here, enable us to see through the eyes of others and open us up to the claims of others. So when we think about the neuroscience, so there's been a significant body of research, and this is actually pretty recent in the last 15 years or so, that has discovered that when an audience listens to a compelling character-based narrative that has sort of a classic dramatic arc, if you will, our brains release certain chemicals, in particular oxytocin, which is sometimes called the love molecule. And oxytocin and the release of it has been proven to result in making people more generous, more compassionate, and more trustworthy when this chemical is released in the brain. And so a number of scientific studies have backed this up. And we know that when stories are more personal and emotionally compelling, they engage more of our brains. And this results in people being more likely to remember the story, the person in the story. And it also increases the capacity for the transmission of values or beliefs across a community, across generations. And in independent schools, we might think of this because we are essentially one of the few potentially cradle to grave communities that exist in our society, I would say outside of religious organizations. This is really important because as schools, we are seeking to sort of transmit values across generations. So what else do we know about the neuroscience? So what neuroscientists have actually done is they've looked at brain scans, so functional MRIs, and they've seen that when individuals are exposed to certain kinds of narratives, different areas of the brain light up when people are exposed to a narrative. And so the parts of the brain that are animated when one is exposed to stories include areas involved with language processing, um, areas that engage in complex information processing as people try to sort of grasp the meaning, the situation, the context, the schema, and other things are happening in the brain too. So most importantly, we are often transported, if you will. And you can definitely think of this if you're reading a great book, a great work of fiction, or if you're taking in a really great film. You will be transported. Your palms might sweat. You might cry. You will be emotionally taken on a trip. And what that has the capacity to do is invite us into others' perspectives and ultimately, potentially, have the capacity to shift our core beliefs and attitudes about certain things. So here's a couple of examples. And I want to situate this, we're all advancement leaders here, right? We're all trying to contribute to the advancement of our schools. So I want to invite you today into a challenge. I want to invite you to be more scientific about your storytelling. So here's two little tiny stories. You can take a look. uh, Micro stories even have the capacity to bring something up in us, right? And to do more than create a sense of connection. That's kind of like the entry point for a well-crafted narrative. I feel connected to what's going on here. What we know from the scholarship is that a good, well-structured narrative also has the capacity to engender feelings of familiarity and trust and invite the listener or reader or observer into the story and make them more predisposed to learning, more open to learning. So good stories, they're actually surprisingly economical. Like here we have two stories, they're really tiny, but they're doing something. And stories allow us to grasp complex ideas in more basic, simplistic, economical ways. And so we know that a story is more engaging than, let's say, a dry recitation of data or facts, and it's more likely to be remembered. One example of this is organizational psychologist Peg Newhouser found that learning which stems from a well-told story is remembered more accurately and much longer than information that is transmitted from facts and figures. Other psychologists have, reified these findings. Psychologist Jerome Bruner's research suggests that facts are 20 times more likely to be remembered if they are communicated in a story. So we talked about the neuroscience, like what's actually happening in our brains when we are drawn into a story. So narratives that cause us to pay attention and involve us on some level emotionally are stories that have been proven to move us to action. And as advancement professionals, this is where this starts to get really interesting. So the most sort of renowned researcher in this domain is Paul Zak. Zak. And I encourage you to check out his work if the talk today is of interest to you. So, in a nutshell, he and his research team, over multiple studies, discovered that character-driven stories not only elicit this physiological response, so in this case, the release of certain neurochemicals in the brain, as we see here, but also when these chemicals are released, it consistently inspires behavioral change. And the behavioral change that is inspired is categorized as what's called cooperative or beneficial behavior. So, in other words, the more a story resonates with an individual, the more likely they are to change their behavior in a way that is beneficial or cooperative. So in Zach's research, he had participants who were exposed to two videos. One video that all the videos were public service announcements, but one form of the video was emotive in nature and involved characters who were sharing the information that was being presented to the public. This video brought out these, neurochemicals in the brain, in particular, oxytocin or the moral molecule that I mentioned earlier. After these individuals left the screening, they were invited to participate or not in a beneficial behavior. And they were 56% more likely to engage in a beneficial behavior. In this case, it was making a contribution to a cause than the individuals who were exposed to the same exact information in a public service announcement that wasn't narratively structured around a story and a character. So this research is really sort of seminal in terms of the literature around storytelling, and it confirms that when people are exposed to these types of narratives, they are significantly more likely to engage in pro-social behaviors. such as donating money to a charity in the case of his research. This is super powerful research, and I encourage you to check it out. Okay, so here's another example, another for instance. These are two stories about two schools, different schools, that took a field trip to a plantation. And so I'm just going to give you a second to look at these two. So in both of these examples, data was shared, right? The school went on a field trip to a plantation, that much we know. But in one example, it was shared in narrative or story form, and it makes you feel something. I've actually shared this slide many, many times, and it still really makes me feel something. And so when we have a feeling about something, you are going to pay attention to it. When emotions are evoked through story, we can think of them as the beam of a lighthouse, okay? Helping guide us toward complexity or discover meaning behind the data. Effective stories can capture our attention. In the case of Joy Gray Prince's story, they might transport us to a particular experience or place or space in time. And an effective story is not a report of what has happened, but rather it's an invitation into why it happened, who was shaped by the story, and what the impact was. So this, I think, is a really great example. So let's just kind of put a bow on the neuroscience, and then we're going to talk a little bit. So we know now from the research, it's been proven time and again that narratives are especially powerful and impactful in terms of changing people's beliefs and beneficial or cooperative behaviors. When this happens, people are more emotionally engaged. They're more open to changing their beliefs. They're more open to new perspectives. We know from additional scholarship that storytelling in, for example, criminal justice reform programs has been proven to impact the way that judges understand the lives of individuals who are in the justice system and has shaped the outcome in verdicts. We also know that stories have been proven to persuade people to modify their behaviors toward healthier lifestyles and to motivate individuals to engage in behaviors that help to combat phenomena like climate change. So we know that stories that inspire emotions, such as empathy, care, and connection, can lead to beneficial behaviors. This is the thesis statement of my talk today. Okay. So how does this tie into our schools? Like, let's take it out of the clouds of theory. I like living up there, but let's bring it back to boots on the ground. So independent schools, you guys know this. I don't need to tell you this. We are storytelling organizations. We are collective storytelling systems. You can walk through the hall of your school after you exit the Zoom room and see a multiplicity of stories unfolding right before your eyes. And so we are perfectly designed to leverage this research to effect because of the kinds of organizations that we are. We're always telling stories, and we have so many stories to tell as we seek to cultivate institutional memory, and honestly, to promote these beneficial behaviors that I just talked about. So I would argue that the work of institutional advancement boils down to seeking to motivate stakeholders toward certain beneficial behaviors. It's all well and good to believe that we're telling stories to make people feel good and feel connected. But ultimately, if we're being strategic, we want to have happen what Zach saw happen in his lab. We want people to be exposed to the story and then respond in terms of a beneficial or cooperative behavior. And these are examples of cooperative or beneficial advancement behaviors. Making a gift, volunteering with the organization, enrolling and re-enrolling, referring others to the school to check it out, attending events, um, word of mouth marketing. So these are examples of beneficial behaviors that storytelling can contribute to the animation of. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking. I want to open the floor. I can see that some people may be just kind of passive in this presentation, which is fine. But if you're listening and want to kind of join, I'd love to just have a roundtable moment. This is a roundtable after all. And think about in your organizations, I'm going to drop these kind of thought sparkers into the chat, but you can certainly take it in a different direction if you wish. But given that we're in a roundtable, let's talk around the table. These are some thought sparkers that I think tie into what I just shared, but I'd love to hear from folks who have taken the time to gather together today. What do you notice? What do you see in your communities around these ideas of storytelling? Um, how are these concepts showing up in your practices? And have you ever thought about storytelling as a force for motivating beneficial behaviors? Who would like to share? Yeah, Amanda, thank you.
So I think we're a K-6 school, and in our community, I think it comes up in the social emotional learning aspect a lot of times. So dealing with students who might be having an issue on the yard in the moment, rather than telling them, what the appropriate behavior is, or having that discussion, often going in with a story when they're in that green zone, able to receive and understand the information and kind of connect to it, is something that's been really successful at our school.
I love that. So you're taking this concept into pedagogical practice, working with students, conflict resolution. I love that. Thank you for that. Really interesting application. Other thoughts? Anyone? Observations? How do you observe the storytelling practice in your community? Johanna, thank you.
I would say, and my annual fund director is on the call, so I don't know if she would agree with me, but I would say that our annual fund letters are written by parents or alumni or other constituents, and they sort of tell a story of their um, connection to the school, their journey at the school, and those stories are pretty compelling. One in particular shared his learning difference in the letter, and it just sort of like it created a very intimate, vulnerable story of what the school did for him personally as an alumni, now a current parent. So I think that's where I've seen it. I don't know if you'd agree, Heather.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why we do that. Thanks, Johanna. For sure, we solicit alumni and then community members to write the letters from their perspective and their experience with the school and why they choose to give. And I think that is a primary example of how a story is compelling and then can motivate people to take action in the way that you hope they will, for sure.
I love that. Thank you, Heather and Joanna, for sharing an example. And I agree. So there's a perfect instance in which an annual fund letter could be used to communicate a lot of data about percentages of giving, how far along we are even in the strategic plan, percentage of faculty retention. Therefore, these are all the reasons you should feel good about giving to the annual fund. But instead, for an individual to share their story about how the school has made an impact on their life, that's really potentially powerful. And I would argue it would be so fun to do a study and compare, right? Do two sets of letters and see which one yielded more gifts. Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have an example of a storytelling practice that you have noticed in your community that you think fits into some of the ideas that we're talking about today? That's been effective? Yeah, Maureen.
So in terms of annual fund, we noticed this year that just the letter, people, are oversaturated, I think, with emails and letters and all of that. So one of the things when we met with our class captains that we realized is that there's a growing desire for our parents to understand how we're supporting our faculty and staff and their health and well-being. And they really expect that our annual fund dollars, when we say that we're supporting our faculty and staff, that in fact, that is where a great percentage of it, whether it's salaries and wages or other experiences for our faculty and staff. So one of the storytelling strategies that we employed this year was at back to school night, we shed light on a new grants program that was initiated a couple of years ago for our faculty and staff, teasing some of those grants that we were able to award to our faculty and staff given our annual fund, the generosity of our families for annual fund. And then coming up next week, and then at back to school night, we had video slideshows of those different experiences. But then coming up next week, we will have a standalone meeting for parents to come and receive presentations from each and every grant recipient and ask questions regarding those grants and to see how their annual fund dollars have been put into action.
Great example. So those individuals, in other words, are going to tell the story of the impact of the funds on
Yes.
their wellness and dedication as faculty members. Great. One of the things that I'm going to share in my recommendations is the power of individual testimonial. And that really can pack a punch in terms of, motivating people to beneficial behaviors. Anybody else want to share a best practice or a promising practice that you've seen in your school around storytelling? Amanda.
Yeah, so Maureen is our director of advancement. She does an amazing job, but we also have a new family dinner in the fall where we welcome grade level parents as well as our new kindergarten families into the community. And we always select a speaker from the community, a parent that maybe has a sixth grader as well as a kindergartner or someone who has already kind of experienced the journey. And they tell their story to the new families in the room about what the community has meant to them, how meaningful it's been, how they've gotten involved, and the impact that's had on their lives. And it's a plea for them to get involved in different ways, whether it's financial or volunteering or whatever it might be. That has been really effective as well and kind of brought really good vibes at the beginning of the year around storytelling in our community.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Amanda. I think that's a great example of if we compare that to, let's say, having the lead administrator for the division get up and talk. It's just the impact is different. You can empathize more with another parent as a parent, right? So you're going to be drawn in to that story more. Great. All right. Well, let's talk about, these are promising practices. I'm so happy that people have shared those. And I'm going to go ahead and share some promising practices that I think, are beneficial in terms of your storytelling strategy. So when we think about just this overarching approach to storytelling, again, I already mentioned this cradle to grave relationship that independent schools have that almost no other organization in our society has. And when we think about this notion that we're really trying to keep people engaged for their entire lives with our organization in order to invite them into loyalty behaviors. All of this feeds into this idea of a life cycle of engagement with a school. And so I just want to sort of notice that when we're doing this work, it has a larger portraiture that is related to ideas around sustainability. So when we exercise strategy that is designed to promote meaningful, emotive, impactful narratives, we already talked about the fact that this activates certain emotions, attitudes, and belief systems. and then has the capacity to activate beneficial behaviors. And in the case of independent schools, we're thinking about loyalty behaviors. And when we have more people from more stakeholder groups in our communities behaving loyally through gifts, volunteering, referrals, word of mouth, all of this sort of is gas in the engine of sustainability, right? So I just want us to kind of like zoom out and think of it from that perspective. I think that that can also, as one who's worked in advancement in more than one school, sometimes you just feel like you're grinding through the cycles and the letters and the events. But when we can think about this more big picture, aspirational goal of sustaining our organizations and really promoting flourishing, I think that's where we can find, inspiration. All right, so some interventions to drive outcomes in storytelling work. So these are some things that I have done in my work. These are things that are evidence-based, and I recommend. Some are bigger lifts than others, so you can maybe think about short-term goals, long-term goals. So first of all, I recommend people do research in their own school settings. So this can be done in the form of a storytelling audit, where in a quieter time, a slightly quieter time for your team, like let's say the summer, gather up your collateral from the year and take a look. Take a look at what you're talking about in your stories. Are you transmitting information, or are you sharing and inspiring emotion? You can do this through looking at your print media, but also at your social media. And doing it retrospectively allows you to really do a authentic analysis of what your practices are and to notice the ways in which you are or are not leveraging effective storytelling. I always encourage people, get out of your office. Like, there's always work to do, thank you notes to write, notes to put in Razor's Edge, all the rest of it. But stumble into stories, like try to spend time doing field work in your community. Faculty are the best co-conspirators for storytelling. And so the relationships you can build with different faculty members to help create a permission structure for them to share their stories, those stories can often be the most impactful. And so those are some recommendations in alignment with data collection. As part of your audit, I always encourage advancement practitioners to notice what the single stories are in your communities. It might be the male lacrosse player is the single story that comes up over and over and over and over again. So whose stories reside at the center consistently, and whose stories are muted or on the periphery or absent? Okay. Who can see themselves reflected back in the audit that you lay out and examine, and who's not reflected in that? This is really important. Noticing the stories and the characters that you use is just as important as noticing who is absent and what the single stories are. Along these lines, like, there are always new leading actors in our community. This is like a female archery team, which I thought they're so much less likely to be featured than the football team or, the lacrosse team. Who are the folks in your community who are doing incredible things that, people don't really know about? And how can those stories sort of spark interest in new ways across your constituencies? So identifying new leading actors, like who can we feature in our storytelling? This was just brought up in the examples that were shared in the annual fund letters, as well as the event where the parent speaker was featured. I encourage storytellers to think small. So you'll see here a couple of micro testimonials. It's literally one quote from an alum. Sometimes those can pack a real punch, and they're also very easy to curate. And so I'm always thinking, like, what's the easiest way to build a storytelling sort of enterprise? And that's why I love testimonials and mini testimonials. Capitalizing on tiny moments that take place at school. Like, for example, the history teacher who keeps a jar on the top shelf of his classroom that has, something that students put into it every year. Those weird sort of bits of nostalgia that This one about chicken fried steak that you see here on the slide is from the Pinecrest School in Fort Lauderdale. It's this super weird piece of nostalgia that's a huge part of their culture. And so that kind of stuff really resonates, particularly with our alumni constituents. So micro moments, individual stories. So I also really encourage your team to use experience design tools. An empathy map is featured here, and this is one of the most powerful tools to use when you're trying to get inside the perspective of particular stakeholder groups. For example, the new parent. What are they thinking and feeling? What are they hearing? What are they seeing? What are they saying and doing? What are their pain points? What are their gains? When we're doing this around particular stakeholder groups, it empowers us to more effectively craft stories that will meet them where they are, right? And meet their needs and identify their wants and needs in ways that are meaningful. This can be a really, I know that a lot of fundraising shops use these. So if you're already using it, awesome. But this can be super impactful to do sort of unpack donor motivations. If you're thinking of like a 50th reunion year class, doing an empathy map on a prototypical member of that group can be really useful as you think about the storytelling techniques you will animate to try to get them to contribute to their transformational gift on their 50th. So yeah, I love the tools of experience design, and empathy mapping is probably my favorite, but there are others like journey mapping. Somebody earlier talked about the journey of a family. And so journey mapping can be another really effective instrument for reverse engineering narratives that are going to be more connected to the actual experiences of your stakeholders. And this is honestly, guys, this is kind of the crown jewel of all of it. That's why I put it last. This requires exercising emotional intelligence, really understanding that telling the stories of other people and inviting people to tell their stories requires a real regard for them as people, as individuals, and requires sensitivity. So, this is sort of the crown jewel of a lot of our work and advancement, but I just like to kind of put a fine point on that. So these are questions that I would encourage you to go out into the world today as you try to think about how you'll make change at your school. These are just reflective questions that can kind of get you started. If your entire marketing team is comprised of white women between the ages of 35 and 42, that's probably going to impact your content generation. And so being mindful of that and unpacking the ways in which you can deal with that is important. Who's behind the camera at your school? This is a big one. And how does that inform what gets documented? And then, how can you intentionally create space, for example, to do a storytelling audit or to set aside time as a team to do some empathy mapping? This does require commitment, but of course, if we want to improve in anything, we have to commit the time. Key takeaways. So, stories flow through our schools. Like I was saying, you'll walk out of this today and there'll be a million little stories happening in the halls and at the car line and all the rest of it. But they so beautifully knit our communities together, even during times of crisis. And so strategic storytelling, is a tool that should not be undervalued. It's actually a set of skills that you can cultivate and build. And intentionality is essential to that. And also allowing yourself to feel aspirational, to know that with each little effort that you make in terms of seeking to tell stories in a way that is strategic and evidence-based, you're contributing to this big enterprise of sustainability and flourishing in your school communities. So I will be sharing my slides with Ara, but I've included some resources. If you found this just interesting, it piqued your curiosity. These are some of the tools I mentioned and some really great authors who are thinking a lot about these ideas and institutes. Again, Paul Zach is really the lead scholar in all of this. And then I've also included some cases that I think are illustrative of diverse and high quality storytelling. So Ara will be sharing my slides and you'll be able, if you want to examine those assets. I will go ahead and open the floor for questions, but also open the door for people that have to get back to their busy workaday lives. I really enjoyed spending time with you all, and I wish you the best in all of the good work that you do. So thanks for being here today. I'll hang back for those who want to chit chat.